so I'm here to talk about Launchpad iOS. So it's a free app for iPhone and iPad. It's free to download, but you can then buy sound packs or subscribe to get access to all our sound packs. It was originally sort of designed to be a companion app to the Launchpad hardware, but it's kind of taken on a life of its own as well. It's got 23 million downloads, which is pretty cool. It's got a very high average star rating, which is quite unusual for an iOS app. And we've been adding sound packs to it every week since it came out in 2012. So it's now got a very large library of content. And yeah, like I said, you can use it with the Novation hardware. So today we're going to be talking about it in terms of its accessibility. So just quickly, what this talk is not about, because it's a short talk, I don't really have that much time to get too deep into the sort of fundamentals of accessibility. I'm also not going to be talking about iOS-specific stuff, because that won't apply to everyone. This is quite an important one. It's definitely not holding up Launchpad as a perfect example, because it's not. But we thought it'd be interesting to talk about it, kind of its journey and where it's been, where it's headed, what we could still improve. So what is this talk then? So it's kind of some practical tips on where to start, the topics we tried to handle in the order we handled them. We're going to use it to show some good examples of accessible design, some bad examples. It is quite front-end focused, but that's just kind of the nature of accessibility. It's about interacting with your app. We're going to talk about accessibility as a process, and why you should be the person who's sort of starting to care about this for your team if it's not already high priority. So one of the things that happens quite a lot in not just audio software, but in all kinds of software, is this kind of we'll do it later kind of attitude to accessibility. And I'm not really here to take a position on that. As you'll see. So just as an example, here's the iOS timeline of accessibility. You can see when the original iPhone came out, they didn't really have that many accessibility features, and they added them in over time. You know, like I said, I'm not here to defend or explain why these things happen. It's just something that happens, really. And here's where Launchpad arrives on the scene. And then it was iPad only at first, and then we did an iPhone version later. I went back through our Git history to look for when the first accessibility commit was. So place your bets. It was here. That's quite a long way after release. And like I said, you can talk all day about why this happens, right? So I'm not going to comment too much. But the important thing on this graph is about the fact that once action started to be taken, it continued to be taken. And it became a thing that improved and only kept improving. And in our case, that was true as well. So it might have taken us a long time to do that first commit. But since then, I think we've got 150 commits that specifically name accessibility in the message, and many more that don't mention it, because it stopped being something we thought of as these are accessibility commits. It started just to be something that we just did. So you might find yourself in this situation that we were in, which is that you've got an app that you shipped years ago, or a product, any kind of product. You didn't consider accessibility during the initial kind of design or release, and you don't really know how accessible it is or isn't. And this is kind of a situation you could get into with a lot of legacy problems, right? Might be that you've got an app that doesn't have tests. It's eventually you're going to have to start writing some tests. So just trying to look at it that perspective. Has anyone found themselves in this position? Just show of hands. Oh, it's got to be more than that. Don't worry, I'm not going to report you to the accessibility police. Yeah, I guess I had a little chat. I don't know if you were here for the accessibility panel yesterday, but I had a brief chat with them afterwards about this, and the important thing is you can't change the fact that you're in that situation. The only thing you can change is to start to improve it. So we started to improve it. And now I just collected a few bits of feedback about our accessibility support. And it's great that we're getting some good feedback about it, but that doesn't mean that we're done. If you've got anything planned to do in your Apple product, you have accessibility planned. Try and think of it in that way. And yeah, so where did we start? Like, what kind of made us begin to actually take it seriously? And I want to talk a bit about just gaining perspective. So if you were here for the talk yesterday, there was a moment where someone was talking about the disconnect between the users and the people who make the software, and how they didn't really feel a connection, like didn't feel represented by the people who are making the software. And this isn't to say like, you have anything to apologize for there. It's just to recognize that your lived experiences are not necessarily the same as everyone else's. And you've got to try and gain a bit of perspective about this. And that's kind of what kickstarted our process. So I think it was around 2016, 17, we were invited to show our app at an event by Heart and Soul. So this was just sort of a music-making evening for people of all abilities, and we went and we showed our app there. And while we consider our app to be a pretty easy-to-use app, right? It's like any other kind of like looping software. Like, it keeps your app in time. We've got nice content. It's pretty hard to make a bad sound with the app. So we go in there confident, yeah, everyone's going to have a great time using our app. And some people did have a good time, but some people also didn't. And it was kind of as an inspiring a day as it was concerning. We really opened my eyes a bit to places that we assumed the usability was fine, but actually it wasn't. And another interesting thing that kind of kick-started us on this process, we were contacted by a charity called Chiltern Music Therapy. And they told us that they were using our app to help rebuild people's cognitive functions after like serious accidents. And we were just like, what? Okay. How just didn't understand. Like, it went and talked to them and just tried to get an understanding of like how they found our app useful, sorry. And yeah, just really trying to understand how they're using it. It was the first time I ever saw one of these. Has anyone seen an accessibility switch before? No? 2 people. Yeah, I'm kind of not surprised because I'd never heard of them before anyway. So this is basically like it's like a controller for like stepping through the hierarchy of your app. So you literally just, on this particular one, you just tap to go to the next items, and then you have another button to interact with it. There's lots of different ways you can set these up. There's lots of different formats of them. Some of them are as simple as just like a tube that you blow through. So people with really quite serious like physical disabilities could still just about use our app because of the way the UI just happened to be implemented. It meant that our pads were kind of exposed to the accessibility hierarchy, and so we hadn't put any particular effort into this. It wasn't a great experience, but it was just about usable. And yeah, this was really eye-opening sort of interaction. So a couple of things that we've learned about this. Basically, the best way to kind of figure out if your system works well is to actually use the tools that people use, right? So we've got VoiceOver on all our like devices. I've got the accessibility shortcut set up, so I can just triple tap the button and I'm testing VoiceOver within a few seconds. We bought an accessibility switch so we could actually try and use it, see how people interact using those. We've got devices where we've got the font size turned up to max so we can make sure that our UI responds in the way that we expect it to. I've also got some color blindness filters on my phone. So these are things that just help you see what your app or product looks like for people with various different conditions. Obviously, everyone's different. Like, 2 people with the same condition might have varying degrees of it, but it's just to get a good an idea. But probably the most important one here is to actually talk to people who, get people using your app, and they'll give you the best feedback that you're ever going to get, basically. And another way to do that is to participate in events like the Heart and Soul event, or even just coming to ADC, right? Going to that panel yesterday, you get to see people actually using it, see that they can be real power users of this software in ways that you might not have expected. So where to start? So the first thing that we did was we tried to get screen reader support into the app. So what we're talking about here is basically going through your app, going through all the various views and filling out the fields that the OS is going to use to construct its accessibility hierarchy, right? So things like, what's the actual physical frame of this part of the UI? What's the voiceover going to read out when you select it? If you hover, is it going to give you some hints? If it's a particularly weird control that you don't just tap on, but maybe you've got maybe it's a dial that you turn or something, we can give it traits that make it easy to use. And we can also do these custom actions on iOS that are just time savers, basically. If it's a task that you're going to do that's repetitive, you can implement a custom action. So this is for native accessibility. So Launchpad is an iOS native app. But what if you're not using native views? So hopefully you're using some kind of framework or something that has its own kind of accessibility kind of fields that you can give to your views. And hopefully that's translated, if not by creating native components that are then actually used, at the very least it implements the accessible protocols. Now, what if you're using something that doesn't do this? That's all you can do, really. Because the other options are probably unrealistic, right? You can swap framework. That's going to take you forever. Or go native. It's kind of not realistic. But all you can do is just keep asking. Unless it's open source, you can do it yourself. But I mean, it's kind of never too late for this stuff, right? Has anyone got a Juice app, for example? Or used Juice at some point? Yeah. So if you were here at ADC last year, I don't know if there's a Juice representative here who can confirm this for me, but I think they did their first update that really exposed to the accessibility. Is that right? 6.1. 6.1, yeah. So that's fantastic. Yeah, round of... So it's never too late, basically. And if you do have a Juice app, your excuse is now gone. So let's talk a little bit about, so say you've gone through and done those, filled out those fields. Now on iOS, you get a lot of free behavior on iOS. So a lot of these labels and buttons and stuff will sort of automatically be exposed, but they'll be exposed in a kind of weird way. These are the items that the OS would just naturally pick up. So that's not how someone is going to build a hierarchy of what's going on in their mind, when they're using VoiceOver, right? They're expecting something a bit more like this. So this is basically about when you're constructing your UIs, you're being sensible about which are the bits that are exposed to the accessible hierarchy and which bits are just being used to fill in the fields. So for example, we would say for one of these sound packs that the name of the sound pack is the bit that the VoiceOver will read out, not the other bits, because that's the important bit. So this might seem obvious, but it's something that you just need to think about. So here's a few other examples. So here's the sound packs list. That's obviously what you'd expect. That's the screen I just showed you. And then this is our news feed. So we've made it so that each news item is just one item. So you can listen to it and then move on to the next one. And it will tell you how you can interact with it based on the traits that it's got. So I can show you this in action. So this is, hopefully, a video.
Get the full experience. Heading. Launchpad. Premium. Try free. Happy Halloween. Heading. Mesmeric citrus. Trance. New. Double tap. Darkest hour. Metal. New. Double tap to find latest sound packs. Heading. Analog Deep House 2. Deep House. New. Double tap to find out more. Play. Button. Analog Deep House 2. Home. Back button.
Cool. So just by sensibly grouping things, you can now navigate through it. This isn't intended to be mind-blowing or anything. It's just, just think about how your groupings are. So here's an example of a more complicated controller, right? This is our key controller. So it's kind of got this custom radial construction. It's not using as many native components, which means that you're not getting as much free behavior. And also, there isn't really a logical way for the views to step through, because it's in a circle. So what do you do for this kind of thing? Well, you've got to kind of take a step back and just think about what your data model is. So in our case, what's this actually representing? It's just representing an integer that's whether or not, just offset from C, basically. So that's a bit more of a manageable concept. So if you think about other things that do something similar, you can think about like the calendar picker, right? It's just an offset of a number, basically. So the way we're going to make this accessible is we're going to use a particular accessibility trait that helps us. So in our case, these are all the iOS ones. The one we're interested in is adjustable. So if we conform our control to the adjustable accessible protocol, it's actually pretty simple now. All people have to do is like swipe up or down to adjust the value. So here's a video of that action.
Key selector. B flat. Adjustable. Swipe up or down with one finger to adjust the value. A. G sharp. G. Reset key. Button. Reset key.
Cool. So subscribing to that protocol was a total of 14 lines of code. And I think the first time I saw that, I was like, this is going to take forever. But actually, it wasn't too bad. So let's talk about custom actions. So here's if you look at the bottom, you can see we've got some filters that you can adjust. And one of the interactions that you can do is you can swipe to reset and zero your filters of volume. It's quite a common thing you want to do. So we made these adjustable as well, so people could go through and change them. But it's pretty irritating to zero these with the voiceover, and you'd find that out pretty quickly by using it. So what we did, I don't have a video of this one, but if you look at, this is the accessibility inspector for macOS. So when I highlight, you can see at the bottom there, we've got some actions that wouldn't normally be there. These are the reset filter and reset all filters. So this is just a case of, I found it very annoying to reset them all. So it seemed like an obvious place to put in an action that would reset them all. So as a side note, definitely use the accessibility inspector, because you can use it on any app. You can sneak around and see how accessible they are. So this is just a brief overview of this stuff. If you want to learn more about screen reader accessibility, there's a workshop on Friday run by, I think it's Ableton team. So definitely attend that if you want more detail. The next thing we did was look at text. So we wanted to support large text size. The old way of doing text is you just say, I'm using this font, this size, and just kind of forget about it until there's a problem. What we want to do is we want to, when people go into the operating system and change text size, we want to support it. So we're going to use dynamic text size. So these are basically like lookup tables. So for a given overall text size, you define the role of the text rather than how big it is, and then that returns you how big it should be. If you turn up the accessible text size in the OS, it returns bigger values relatively for all of these roles. So here's an example from Launchpad. If you look at the popover, you can see we've got just a few menu fields, and when you turn it up, because we've used dynamic text, you can see it's bigger. Pretty simple, but a couple of things to note. So where possible, we like to grow the UI to make room for these bigger items. That's not always possible, and you should probably set a limit, otherwise this would fill up the whole screen. But yeah, where possible, make room for it. While preparing this talk, I noticed this truncation. that shouldn't be there. Because if someone has turned up the large text, it's because they want to read the text. There's no point in making it bigger just to truncate it, because then you can't read it. So I checked our code, and it should be working, so that's a bug for me to fix later. Cool. So what about if you haven't got as much room to grow in? So here's like SoundPack browser. Obviously, there's not a huge amount of room for the text to grow there, so something's got to give. So here's what happens when you turn this up. So you can probably notice the picture has gotten smaller, and this is, again, just the same reasoning, really. It's people have turned up the text size because they want to read the text. Something's got to make way, so you've got to decide what the most important element is. And in our case, we decided that specifically the name of the pack is the most important element. So we allow it to grow to 2 lines tall as well. Which is, it seems obvious, but it's just one of those things you need to think about. They're actually the same size, overall size. You can compare them, but just think about what the most important element is. If you've got lots of text, not all text is equal, so decide what the most important text is. And then, just make a decision. So just want to touch briefly on color and contrast. And this is the part of the talk where Launchpad becomes really quite a bad example. So I'm just going to show you just the iPhone app. Do these colors mean something? I know what they mean, but that's because I've used it lots. So what about if you're colorblind? It's not the best. You can see a lot of the colors just look the same. And also there's this weird effect on the tritanopia on the second row. You can see it's actually, it looks like it's almost grayed out. It looks like it's in some sort of off state or something. And it's not supposed to. Now, what's interesting about this is that we redesigned the app a few years ago, and I've actually got a picture of the old design. Can you tell me what the colors mean now? Should be a bit more obvious, and you should still be able to tell me what each pad is in this situation as well. And it's pretty obvious why. It's because we have some redundancy in our categorization, right? We have both the color and the text telling you what each pad's broad category should be. So it's kind of a bit of an uncomfortable situation where I have to admit that the old design was more accessible. Not just for people who are colorblind, but just in general, right? The color is not the only genre indicator, so it helps you kind of learn what the colors are supposed to represent. It's just descriptive text. It's more obviously a music-related app at first glance, right? Some people might think that's like a puzzle game or something. It's got better contrast with the background, so you can see where the edges of the pads are a bit clearer, and also the grays in the background, more contrasted with the grays in the background of the pad. And this is just one of those things where we have to just say, just made a mistake, really. It's less accessible. So this is something I really want to do something about, and hopefully I'll be able to do something about it soon. So because I can't use Launchpad as a good example, I'm going to just show some fun games instead. This is a game called Hue. So you can see this is like a color matching game where you match the color on your little color wheel to the environment. This should not work for colorblind people, right? This fundamentally seems opposed to the idea of accessibility, but all you have to do is add a bit of redundancy to your design, and suddenly people can use it. So I think it's a really good example of a subtle tweak you can make to make it more understandable. I had a bit of a chat with a friend of mine who does talks at game developer conferences about colors and color selection. I was asking him about different approaches you can take just as research for changes we'll hopefully make. And we were talking about filters, like global color filters. And they're okay. They're a quick fix. Most of the time, they're already in the operating system. But they're prone to these invisible problems. When I say invisible problems, I mean it's a problem that a colorblind user doesn't even know exists. And someone who can see all the colors also can't tell that there's a problem. So you need two people who can see what's supposed to be viewed and what someone else is interpreting to even be able to tell that there's a problem in the first place, which is quite tricky. They don't tell you what's changed when you put the filter on. You're not actually sure what it's doing some of the time, and the change might not suit everyone. So another approach you can do is let people choose the colors themselves. And the appeal of this is that you can teach users just by the menu what to look for. Let them choose colors that work for them. And this benefits everyone, right? People like to choose colors. It's fun. But it does take a little bit more effort. So I've got an example from Overwatch here. Now, there's no doubt about what the 4 colors you're supposed to know and what they represent here. And if you can't tell the difference between them, you can tell from looking at this menu that there's a problem. You can tell that you're supposed to be able to tell the difference between 2 of these colors, and you can't. You can change them, come up with a scheme that you like. So this is quite a good approach, I think. And just one last thing about contrast. He showed me this funny example from Fortnite, where people cottoned on to the fact that it was easier to spot enemies with the colorblind mode on, because it made them super high contrast. So you get all these YouTube videos being like, you can be as good as a ninja if you turn on colorblind mode. And really what that's telling you is that when the contrast is making it easier to telegraph between the elements, maybe that's a good place to look for kind of substance over style type approach, right? Where you're not worrying too much if it looks the coolest, as long as it's easy to use. So just to summarize that quickly, I realize I'm running low on time. Yeah, so this is just some advice that I'm hoping to implement in Launchpad soon. So let's say you've gone through that. So you've got screen reader support, direct text support, you're happy that your color and contrast is good. It's great, you've achieved accessibility, right? Put it in the done, give yourself a medal. And then, oh no. And then a few months later, you'll put out a new feature and someone will be like, oh, yeah, this doesn't work. This doesn't work with the accessibility system. So how can we avoid this? Let's talk about continuous accessibility. So anyone who's learned about habit theory can tell you, like, if you want to encourage behavior, you should make it easy. And if you want to discourage behavior, you should make it difficult. So let's reduce the barriers to testing. So we can set up shortcuts to turn on accessibility features so we can quickly access them. We can have, get one of these. You can have devices. So we have some devices where the system font's turned up to the max. You can recruit beta testers or get a consultant, those kind of things. Just make your life easier. And then on the opposite side, you can increase the barriers to forgetting it. So you can make it part of your definitions of what's finished, what's ready, what's a signed off design. Put it in your pull request criteria, put it in your QA sweeps. If you've got beta testers, they'll tell you pretty quickly if something doesn't work. Yeah, just as a last point, I'm not saying we do this perfectly, right? This is as much for me as it is for everyone else. So yeah, what are the biggest lessons we've learned? So probably the biggest one is that accessibility is a process, not a task, right? You're not done. If you've got any changes planned, you're not done. You've got to consider how those changes will affect the accessibility. And a more accessible app is better for everyone, right? When we did that design change, we made it worse for everyone, not just accessible users, I think. This is an interesting one. No one's going to come along to your team and be like, unless you work at a massive company who's got someone whose full-time job is to just go around telling you to make things more accessible. You've got to be motivated to do this yourself. Every time you make a change, you've got to be motivated to say, well, wait, hang on, is that going to work with what we've done before? And it will make you a more grounded developer as well, I think, because you'll be considering things from a usability perspective more. That's just generally a good thing, make your software more accessible. And last thing is just the more you do, the easier it gets, right? If we were starting a new iOS app tomorrow, it would be almost impossible for me to not consider it just because I've been considering it for so long now. And just lastly, yeah, it means so much to the people who use it. Just like I said, this is where we got to. And we're happy about that in regards to VoiceOver, but we want to improve it in other areas as well. And that's exactly 30 minutes. Cool. Yeah, that's it.
Just wondering, are you aware of any automated tooling for evaluating the accessibility of an app in a sort of continuous fashion? So sort of something that could flag to you if you've implemented some colors that are going to be completely undifferentiable.
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, you could certainly have some scripts that run to check if you've got, like, you know, what your coverage of the accessibility fields are. But in terms of like color detection, I don't think there's a substitute for really just, you know, looking at it, getting either like using filters or asking people. Yeah, there might be something. I don't know. Another one? Online question.
Florian asks, at what point of development would you recommend taking accessibility into design considerations?
Day one. Yeah, because like I said, if you try and do it later, you'll just realize that the way you've constructed your UI is wrong. You're gonna have to think about the parent-child relationships between the views. You have to completely start those from scratch again. It's not gonna save you time leaving it till later. It's just not. So it's a pretty simple question. Obviously, I've tried to frame this talk from the perspective of you're in the situation, and we're not going to cast aspersions on how you got there. It's absolutely better to do it from the start, no question. But I kind of wanted to point out that that's not the luxury position most people are in, for whatever reason.
As a solo engineer, I wonder how you find these opportunities to collaborate. So, what was the event called? Heart and Soul.
Heart and Soul, yeah.
And the Chiltern thing as well. Do you approach these people, or do they approach you?
I think in the case of Chiltern, I think they approached us. I can't remember. Yeah, they approached us. Yeah, okay. In terms of Heart and Soul, I can't remember. I might have met them here a few years ago, but I can't remember. I think it was a chap called Ashley who came and talked at an accessibility panel. I think I might have talked to him after. I can't remember. But I think they asked us about our app. I think.
Well, you had that sort of visibility by then.
Sorry?
You had that sort of visibility by then.
I'm not sure. I think I just went to talk to them after a panel, I think, but I can't remember. Sorry.
Okay, it's great because it seemed to be almost like the conversion story behind your finding the importance of accessibility.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Like I said, no one's going to come along and say, like, you've got to do this, right? And you might not even get requests for it. It's like you've got to kind of widen your own perspective and come up with the motivation to do it from within your team, because that's the only way it's going to be sustainable. That's the only way you're going to keep at it, really. Yeah.